Okay, everyone, this is going to be a interesting kind of topic about something um, a little bit interesting with the new Captain America movie coming out. I would actually was actually got to thinking about the Incredible Hulk as in general. And these are just my personal speculations about the nature of what the Hulk is and why exactly he's so powerful. Um, it's always kind of baffled me about how powerful he really has be it is uh, overall. Mostly just because he was just an ordinary person before the gamma radiation, and in theory it should have been able to poison him outright. So eventually it would just cause his body to just shut down. But that kind of got me thinking. What exactly it said what exactly was affected by the gamma radiation because we're not entire because there are different types of heroes out there that can get their powers through accidents, or if in the Marvel universe you could wake up and find out you're a mutant. DC also has something like that. They just call it like a metagene, and that kind of got me thinking about what if in this case any version of Dr. Banner was a metahuman, and the actual transformation essentially awakened his latent powers. In this case, I got me kind of thinking about in the first Deadpool movie when they injected him with all that kind of mutagenic formula, and at very best, all it really was supposed to say, okay, if you do have any potential for becoming a hero, this is going to what's bringing it out. So there is some kind of genetic blueprint that would say, hey, this is what your power is going to get if something were to activate. Whether you were naturally born with the powers, if you were exposed by cosmic radiation like the Fantastic Four, or if you were part of the Big Bang process from static shock. So I could possibly say any said various characters who have become Hulk beings naturally have the ability to have some level of superhuman strength already in them. This, in this case, superhuman strength is actually is a fairly easy power to actually awaken because um, we always have that unknown percent of human potential within us, but it is constantly being suppressed by our brains. And since we're not trying to like fly, shoot energy, or run fast, use our instead awaken greater potentials of the mind, you can actually have the ability to lift, quite a bit of strength, but and just be standing still at the same time. It's like casually lifting something very heavy. Kind of like when you're a little kid and you pick up something that was like 10 pounds, you're saying, "Oh, this is very heavy." Then you wait about 10 years and you pick it up, it's going, yeah, it's a little heavy, but you have so much more weight to kind of put behind you, so it's not that big of a deal. So that's of one potential is the fact that when the gamma radiation essentially, washes over someone, it does, awaken this power, but it also mixes with the fact that the Hulk is actually, very large. So in this case, he has a lot more weight to actually throw around. So if you're normally only, I said Dr. Banner is normally like 200 pounds normally, and he turns easily, over a half a ton. That's gonna give him, five times the power. But the way his individual muscles are essentially enhanced, it's almost like having several more, muscles doing the work at the same time. So essentially, you gain like four times your weight. That's almost like half instead of an extra. It's almost like really layering each into like each part of your muscles, is doing it at the same time. So if you already have that superhuman strength, that's also be turned on, then you already have that. And if even if they also would say some versions of the Hulk is actually some a different kind of being that's kind of brought to the surface, and you could possibly and it's very easy to say this is how strong they are normally, but kind of when everything's kind of put together, that is further augmented. And one kind of idea that may show, why power, instead why someone like Dr. Banner was so powerful involved the old TV series from the 1970s where they found an abnormal genetic cluster in that when responds that when gamma radiation from the sun is quite active, it allows other people to actually become much stronger. Which in this case, he was trying to figure out why he couldn't use it, despite they eventually showed him having a higher than most of the other candidates for that one. But I would have said that it's quite possible, if they were to reshoot something kind of a scene like that, they would have said it would have been a lot higher than that one. So it definitely would have caused him to want to experiment gamma radiation more just to see the actual trigger. And so in this case, so naturally when the Hulk transforms, through anger, so he's got his own gamma pulse that causes him to become a lot strong. So it's causing a lot stronger. So it's like going 0 to 60 in barely any time at all. So as long as he keeps being angry, he will become quite powerful. And as he continues, actually, if he does have the ability to increase in size, he will definitely gain a bit more strength. But for me, that's as said, it's actually having a lot more weight behind him that really makes him a threat. Because anyone who knows anything about classic symbiotes is that Venom himself isn't actually very powerful. He gains most of his power from the fact that he is close to 800 pounds. He said, at least when he first starts out, so he kind of has to keep, layering the strength on over time, and depending upon what the actual host already has in them, um, that is actually what can make him a lot more dangerous. Because when the Scorpion gets it, the symbiote is actually able to quadruple his size. It said and just kind of it just says, okay, now you're a much heavier individual who still has the basic strength, because which surprisingly that was already used by the Rhino. In this case, he does actually have superhuman strength, but the polymer that was bound to his skin essentially makes it no like he's a person who's much heavier also using it. So now so that's kind of always been kind of thing in the back. And now that we're getting a new Red Hulk, it kind of got me thinking about what exactly can make him a bit different. And part of my geekiness um, started to put a few pieces together, and it just started to kind of make sense. So one particular idea involving with the that I have involves the additional kind of like cosmic energy, throwing everything together, because he is the Red Hulk. For General Ross is the Red Hulk. So there has to be a valid reason for why he's red. This is in this case, if you're talking about the various Lantern Corps, there is a different power source used for each one. So in this case, so it's almost as though many versions shows there's been a cosmic energy and radiation, and that's when some things started to kind of click with me. Um, One idea was the fact from actually a Japanese series called Bioman, which essentially was which actually was one of the amazing series that we never got to see adapted into Power Rangers back in the day. But one thing that made all their characters very powerful was the fact they had these mysterious bioparticles that gave them a much greater amount of physical strength over time. And while in this case they did technically transform and put on their suits, it kind of made it seem as though that the suits were just nothing more or less than a protective measure, and what all their physical strength was just essentially the bioparticles being a bit active. And over time, they actually had to build up their powers because they were being hunted by someone who essentially had the anti bioparticles, or it's almost like saying he was powered by kryptonite, like their version of kryptonite. So they had to essentially build up their own reserves and then actually develop neo bioparticles. And that change in the recipe could allow for a totally different power scale altogether. So you're not entirely sure what exactly goes in to each form, because the whole point of various metahumans is that something goes wrong, other people want it, but they can't replicate it very well. But if you're also kind of talking about the reason why the Hulk kind of wants something, it actually reminds me of another series with Jetman the where most of the warriors, most of the actual Rangers or other Jetmen, receive their powers when basically a power chamber exploded, and everyone instead the other four colors were struck by lightning. While in this case, the Red Ranger was the one normally actually exposed. Now they never really fully addressed if this puts everyone on the same kind of power as the intention things, but the fact is that this random, explosion was able to essentially give random people everywhere instead of the random people their powers. So you could almost would say that the randomness was almost kind of like what actually created, a Green Hulk. And it was like all of them actually hit him at once, and you could say that's what would make it. The ironic part is that in Jetman they didn't actually have a Green Ranger, unless you're talking about the manga. So it's like here's everything else. Here's basically a black, the powers of black, white, blue, and yellow all kind of put together. So if you do kind of mix that together, you would have some kind of strange green color. And you could possibly say with the enhancements of the Red Hulk, that's almost like here's the missing color to make something, insanely powerful, as I said, and much harder. Because a lot of versions of the Red Hulk always show him being, something a bit stronger than normal. Kind of like the difference between, kind of like with like Broly from Dragon Ball. His legendary Super Saiyan power back in the day was basically meant to overcome all the weaknesses of a Super Saiyan transformation. If you could only use the boosted grades instead, rather than just going full Super Saiyan 2. And okay, and this is just the fact that one, he does have green aura and he's much bigger and muscular. So it's all about how you really want to slice the individual elements. And even other versions of the Hulk that kind of pop up in other formats, like they showed in Static Shock a purple Hulk, showing the fact that yes, he would transform when he became emotional, although he was only in one episode, but he was purple because the Big Bang gas that gave him his power was also purple. And pretty much it was just like, okay, how do we make a Hulk, for the sake of, something else. Then again, when they actually had the old series on Jimmy Neutron, they gave him the ability to turn into a Hulk, although at first he just thought he was just a guy who smelled like oranges, because right before getting his powers, he quickly downed some orange juice and got into an arm wrestling contest with his kind of like a rival Cine Vortex, and just his emotional trigger uh, turned him from someone like that of a super like a Kryptonian into the Hulk. I mean, in this case, he got so emotional, he said, and then slowly transformed into it. But at least he was actually able to still kind of talk. And I always kind of found it strange, you know, when the Hulk can actually talk, and when he can't, even if it's just, just saying Hulk smash or something. You kind of want to know how much is actually in there. Those other versions could show him being a bit on the grumpy side, but if you were to say, "Hey Hulk, you want to go to the movies?" and you might say, "Yeah, let's go see Titanic," you know, so rather than just talking like a total caveman. And because I remember when they showed the scene from the first Incredible Hulk movie where he's looking after Betty in the cave. They actually showed the comic book version, and he actually, was talking to her, primitively, but it's like, yeah, Hulk make fire, and he was actually able to bandage her head wound up, like he still knew what was in there. 'Kay, and that's always just kind of been kind of a conundrum. Like, where exactly do you draw the line between, him being this, senseless brute, and him actually being more of a real hero? And because there are times when the Hulk can definitely be, heroic, but people always seem to exacerbate things. That kind of triggers everything else. Like in Ultimate Avengers, when he used a modified super soldier serum to allow him to actually fight against that version of the Chitauri. Um, he definitely did show he was fighting, pretty well, but you know, no one just kind of let him kind of cool off afterwards. I mean, if they literally just brought him some food, to make him, would have made him just happy enough that he might have just, slowed down, given him a bit of respect. So it's just almost like, they could have, done something to kind of keep him in a better state. I mean, the idea is the fact that one, instead of that version, you got him a little bit upset, that's when he would transform. And I'm thinking, there are plenty of movies out there that can definitely make you cry, in some kind of thing, or you get some kind of bad news about someone, and you want to show your sympathies, but just the fact that even the slightest change in emotion would turn you into that kind of monster. It's like, where exactly is the threshold? Because in the old school series, there were a number of different catalysts that caused him. And sometimes he was actually, attacked by some kind of animal. Like at one point, actually instead ran into a bear that caused him to transform. He was actually stung by a scorpion, bitten by a rattlesnake. Um, and even the smaller bees was enough to actually cause, the emergency transformation. Although with the bees, he was actually right near a downed meteor that kind of caused his powers to go a little bit haywire for that particular story arc. But just the fact that being stung, so many times triggered the issue of pain. And of course, they also would show that if he had like a dream at the wrong time, that's what would cause them. And at one point, he actually was getting help from someone and was reliving, the fact of losing his wife that caused him to just simply wake up from his trance, and that's what caused him to transform. And then then again, they also show the fact that when he was that someone actually tried to poison him, it kicked in automatically, and then there was also a moment where once he actually reached like 200, like his pulse was like 200 beats, per minute, kind of what they showed in the actual movie, that just automatically just said, okay, your heart's beating too fast. We're going to turn you into something bigger that, definitely has a different, that can actually handle the rate. So it's always kind of strange about what exactly causes the Hulk to transform. I mean, yes, they showed Mark Ruffalo's, Hulk saying I'm angry all the time, but yet, when he fell in the Avengers movie, you know, like he understood that okay, everything is fine. He could have just listened, to Black Widow, like if he was supposed to be the main kind of thing. He could have at least saying like, yes, everything hurts, but it's just like if he could have just said, "Are you okay? Can you move?" That might have been something because that could have just been a regular, turning on the Hulk, for the sake of doing so, not making him like so angry, on the verge that this was just the last straw that caused him to transform. Because it's one thing for to be transformed by emotions, it said and pain, but if he's supposed to be as disciplined and controlling it, it's like, where exactly does that go? Because sometimes you just don't know what exactly has gone into it. Because when they actually had the movie Next Avengers, they said that, and they showed him actually being a much older version after the world has fallen. They didn't really say how long it had been since the last transformation. All we do know is that, you know, he's been in isolation for a long time since, 13 years since, since Ultron started taking everything over. So you just don't really know what exactly is supposed to happen. It's like if he doesn't transform, for a while, does he actually need something extra? Because the um, the son of Ant-Man and the Wasp actually did try to basically shock him into it, but it was the fact that he was badly attacked by a series of other robots, that caused him to transform. But at first, he was hit and seemed like he was just stunned, and then basically having the constant barrage of energy was enough to actually awaken the Hulk. So, is there some way for him to essentially not transform as a whole um, from, years of isolation? He said, because, it's always just kind of a bit of a conundrum because in the Avengers, they did say, it's been a year since the last transformation. So you would think that he would have found some kind of way to learn how to control everything. And while there is the whole, he learned how, eventually became like the Professor Hulk, that's okay, but we don't really know the true extent of what he can do, if he truly needs to. It's like, what it said, what really allows him to truly become, back to his old self, and then would he eventually need to be retrained not to become, to not be retrained? Because after all, before that, he spent 2 years as the Hulk, you know, you know, um, fighting on that, on whatever, I forget what the name of the planet was for everyone's amusement in Thor Ragnarok, but we don't really know what exactly that could have had an effect on him because it seems like he's always in that thing and he was able to kind of talk. Seems like he does everything as the Hulk. So we don't, and so that they never really like said what exactly the gimmick was and what really kind of caused him to become, to remain that way. Because what if someone made him really happy, about things, and he just basically had one of those days, a perfect day, and he just fell asleep, and all of a sudden it's like, who's this guy in the Hulk's bed? Just the fact that they really needed to explain all that stuff. Then again, I wasn't going to waste my time with She-Hulk because I always hate when they make a female character that seems way too, perfect, in that stuff. Because at least in this case, that made sense. The fact that she at least got the blood of a more controlled Hulk rather than, just the raw, emotion thing. So that's why she could probably transform at will. But, you know, unless you actually truly saw her losing, control to actually feel what it was like to be labeled as a monster, that's not that's not the same thing in my book. But I definitely do hope that we get some good explanations involving all specific characters in this new Captain America movie. There definitely needs to be some pretty serious cameos because I said Sam Wilson is not, you know, what I would call the best idea for Captain America because he doesn't really have any powers. Everything he kind of needs is through gadgets. Nothing really wrong with that, but there are times when you cannot fight with gadgets of any kind. It's like everything has been badly broken, and you realize, okay, I'm just an ordinary human that's in decent condition, but this guy is a raving monster, and it wouldn't really take that long, before you fall apart. So you definitely do need to have some explanations of things. And again, it's almost like the difference between, you know, like how I said, realizing, what kind of strength everything is, because If you're more of like a magically based character, I would say the frequency of what your strength is very different than someone, with greater bulk. It's kind of like, with like Superman. Yes, he definitely would say this is what the frequency said. This is what his conventional strength is. He's actually lifting it. He actually generated himself. But someone like, Shazam or Black Adam, they're more of a magically enhanced ones. And for me, if one was to actually listen, like to represent each thing as music, it's like Superman would have like the original track of something, and then all the magic thing is actually Weird Al's version. Where in this case, it's its own separate thing, and it gets the job done. But it's like, hey, I never would have heard this. Like something like I Love Rock and Roll was said with an accordion. It's like it's a totally different thing, and it's what it needs to be. It's not like when Vanilla Ice repurposed Under Pressure. It's like, well, I partially use it. It's like, no, you didn't even try to play anything vaguely original just to just to add everything. It was like a carbon copy of something. So certain characters are always going to be different because you never know if there's going to be like a Magic Hulk that has strength that's a little bit differently, very similar to Solomon Grundy said, or just or like someone who's a bio experiment that essentially basically just has a bunch of steroids going through their body and they turn themselves into a monster. Because that would always be different. I mean, at least with Solomon Grundy, you have the fact that he's undead. He was exposed to weird chemicals in Slaughter Swamp, and then his entire body is actually a hybrid between it's a regular human matter and plant matter put together, and he's also very large. So when you put everything together, it may not be exactly the same thing if you were to find, okay, if you were plants, this is how much strength you have. If you're undead, this is how much strength you have, and this is how much strength you get from the weird chemicals. It may not be exactly like it, but the fact that all of it's together, creates something that's pretty dangerous as a whole. Because it's almost so you kind of need to get there, in time. Because last thing you want to do is think that you're incredibly overpowered, but um, it's still you're missing something. It might as well be the difference between, like, kind of like in Dragon Ball, you're really pushing regular Super Saiyan, but what you really need is Super Saiyan 2. Like, there definitely would have to be something that really brings your power up to an insanely high level and makes you, you know, overpowered. Because one thing people actually may not have kind of really remembered from the original Incredible Hulk movie was that the psychologist person was supposed to be someone called Doc Samson eventually. And while you eventually would be exposed to gamma radiation gain power, the idea is like with the biblical character of Samson is that his long hair represented his strength. So the longer his hair, the more powerful it was. So if you just had shorter length hair, you could definitely do something pretty good, but you didn't really look like you were overly, bulked up or anything. But yet, if you kind of look like you were Super Saiyan 3, then that would be something that would become insanely overpowered in a very short period of time. So depending upon how quickly your hair grows, could definitely affect everything. I mean, it's still gamma radiation, which could possibly have very different, applications overall. But as I said, but if you're one of the few people that could really benefit from it, that's going to definitely be different than someone who just seems to have a very large form and incredible strength. Because look at someone like that, a Bane. He has to constantly kind of push himself with how much venom is in him at any given time. And while they did show a version of him looking a lot more Hulk-like, um, uh, other versions do show him being nothing more or less than turning himself into an instant bodybuilder, kind of like they had in the awkward Batman and Robin. But yet, his strength isn't nearly up there. Some versions say he lifts about 2 tons. Something actually says about 15 tons, which, just the fact that various characters, it said in DC and Marvel, are shown being able to lift 100 tons, very casually. And, yeah, and just the fact that, but they're small. So if everything kind of with the Hulk is there, lifting, a 100-pound object, may not, instead, 100-ton object may require a little bit of effort, but it's just like, okay, yeah, it's like I just woke up and someone says, lift this 50-pound object for me, from one place to another. It's like, you pick it up going like, oh yeah, that's as heavy, but it's said, then you move it, but you wake up enough, get some coffee in you, and then someone says, no, we actually need to move it over here. It becomes a lot easier. So, this is a bit on the longer side, and just me kind of rambling about things, but that's just who I am. Hope everyone enjoys this thing. Feel free to comment if you think if there's anything else, and I really hope everyone has a good day. And I'll try to actually have make another video shortly, and with this kind of creepy kind of lighting will actually work to its benefit. But thankfully, it'll be much shorter, um, you said, in this one. So have a good one. See you soon.